JoJo's Bizarre Adventure: The 7th Stand User is a pretty cool fan game. You probably already know about it if you're on my channel, but if you don't, here's the rundown. It's a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure JRPG made by one woman from Japan, Clayman. You get to travel along with the Stardust Crusaders as your trusted friends and companions. You, the player, after passing a short test, you receive one of 18 different stands, specifically made for your personality type. This fan game is so great, it warranted its own fan game. 7th Stand User 2, Fate is Unbreakable, a sequel that takes place in Part 4. There's been a demo out for it for a few years now, and having played it, it's pretty neat. I am hyped. I am eagerly looking forward to any news they release and seeing the game come to completion. Support them in any way possible. They deserve it. I don't have many complaints about the game except, well, you saw the title of the video. Today I'm here to talk about that test. Not the stands, not the gameplay, because one, 7th Stand User 2 is still in active development. It's probably going to stay that way for a while. And two, honestly, when it comes to the other parts of the game, like the stands, I love them. I love their design, I love their concept, I love their powers. They're just so cool to me. But without further ado, let me move on to why I think the 7th Stand User 2's personality quiz is lacking compared to its first games. The first one is right at the beginning of the quiz. The first question. And this one problem is actually two problems, but we'll get to that. Just look at this. The first question you're met with is, what do you think about fate? When it comes to the full context of the concept of fate in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it usually embodies this looming force, the predetermined, predestined events that are inescapable, unavoidable. And one of the major themes of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is grappling with fate. That's why so many of the villains in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure essentially try to subvert fate or misfortune in one way or another. Pucci's plan for Heaven was creating a universe in which everyone knew their destiny, everyone knew their fate ahead of time. Diavolo's entire character motivation is to avoid any pitfalls he might face, and symbolized through his stand, King Crimson, and Epitaph, seeing the future and avoiding any negative consequences that may fall upon him. Yoshikage Kira was pretty much an idiot. He skirted by on luck, believing fate was on his side until the very, very end, where he ruined it because of his own arrogance. And then you look at the protagonists of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and their message is essentially, no matter how terrible your fate might be, no matter how much the odds are stacked against you, never stop doing the right thing. So, you could say that the concept of fate is a pretty big deal in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So when the first thing you see when you finally load into the quiz is, what is fate? That's a pretty heavy question to lead with, don't you think? I get it's in the title of the game and all, but I feel like this is a question better reserved towards the end of the test, rather than the first thing you're presented with. Imagine if you were playing a Naruto game and the first thing you were asked was, is keeping bonds alive important? Compare that to the first game. The first thing you're asked there is essentially, are you introverted or extroverted? And how much trust do you put in other people? These are more personal questions that are simpler, more engaging, and easier to connect to. Knowing where you stand in a crowd and how much you trust other people are much more relevant to your personality. But that's not the only reason the first question here is so much worse than the first questions in the 7th Stand User 1. The other reason, the second reason that I mentioned earlier, is the fact that in the 7th Stand User 2, the first question is the most important question. See, when the 7th Stand User 2 asks you what you think about fate, it's not really factoring in towards the personality result. It chooses your stand's range. If you choose the first option, Fate is Unbreakable, you get a short range stand. The second option gives you a medium range stand. The third option gives you a long range stand, while the last option gives you a random range. From there, answering the various questions in the test will give you points in 6 different personality traits. The problem is that, compared to the first game, your option is kind of locked in from the first question you answer. In the first game, there's 9 personality traits instead. These traits are designated from A to I. Serious, cooperative, proud, anxious, cold, cautious, cheerful, ambitious, and calm. However, there's 18 stands. That's double the amount of traits there are. So how it works is there's a main trait and there's a secondary trait. And while answering the first 2 questions is very important in where you'll land, it's still possible to really end up with any stand from there depending on how you answer those questions from then on. Certain answers will put you in a different category, and those points add up until you fall under a certain stand. You can flip from one personality to its complete opposite depending if you say no or yes to certain questions. For example, answering off in my own place and trust lands you in the A category, or serious. Yet by answering the right questions, it gave me deep purple, which has I, or calm, as its primary trait, and H, or ambitious, as its secondary trait. Imagine if the stand that fit you the best was deep purple, but due to the first question you answered, you could only get medium range stands or long range stands. You couldn't get short range stands. And I just feel like that's a glaring flaw. Now, the last thing I'll compare between the 2 quizzes is not the questions but the answers themselves. In the 7 Stand User 1, the questions often have simple yes or no answers, the exception being the first 2 questions that are asked at the start, which have 3. In 7 Stand User 2, however, most questions have 3 or 4 different answers you can choose from. Now on paper, it sounds like an improvement, but I think that in practice that it's kind of a downgrade. I like the idea of there being more out there options in terms of the answers you can give, but it feels like a lot of these boil down to just being memes. For instance, one question asks you, what would you do if you got served bad food at a restaurant? Now there's 3 reasonable options you can somewhat see being in the realm of possibility. That being, you complain about it, you kept quiet and ate it, or you walked out. And then there's a 4th, very memeable option. Ha ha ha, Josuke punched the spaghetti. Another example is the question that asks you, what do you find most attractive in your partner? And then your choices are their eyes, their sexy underwear, which is weird to me, their personality, or their... Honestly, half of the answers here are weird to me. Personally, I would have framed it as their looks, their personality, and then as a scumbag option you could say their status. I understand the want to put in little insight jokes and winks and nods and nudges and all that, but I mean, imagine if the first game asked you, what is your greatest fear? And one of the options was toilets, because ha 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 ha, Polnareff has trouble in bathrooms. At that point, you might as well be taking one of those pop quizzes online that tells you which JoJo's Bizarre Adventure character you are. Wow, you mean that because I like kicking puppies, that I'm just like Vanilla Ice? No way! It really loses authenticity. In my opinion, one of the main strengths of the original personality evaluation from the first game is the fact that it asks you about you. What I mean by this is that many of the questions ask for your direct thoughts and opinions on it. Do you believe humanity is fundamentally evil? Do you believe in survival of the fittest? Do you think that there's someone who truly understands you? Do you like this? Do you dislike that? The questions in the 7 Stand User 2's personality evaluation seem to be much more, what would you do in this situation? And I feel like it's just a little cheap, I guess. I feel like you can glean more of a person's personality from questioning their thoughts and feelings rather than just, if you were in this place in this specific scenario, what would you do? Overall, those are my main grievances with the game. Yeah, not even the very long intro that it takes to get into the game because, well, the way I see it is, it's still a demo. I don't see them putting in an option to skip all of their hard work in the demo. I hope my criticism is constructive, and honestly, I hope to see the best out of the 7 Stand User 2. It's important to keep in mind that I'm comparing 2 games that are at different stages of their lifespan. Like I said earlier, the 7 Stand User is almost a decade old. Since 2014, Clayman has been constantly developing her game and adding more and more content. It didn't start off with things like chaos mode. It's very important to keep in mind how much effort, how much work, how much time and love goes into making these games. So try not to be too harsh, because following in Clayman's footsteps is a pretty big ask.